I'm John from Oddman Audio. We're in process of developing a granular synthesizer called Groc, this little beauty. Granular synthesis has been around since the 1980s, became more widely available in the 2000s, and then found its way into Eurorack modules, guitar pedals, and dedicated hardware synths over the last 10 to 15 years. But the earliest proposals for granular sound processing actually date back even earlier, to the 1940s and Dennis Gabor, who first proposed a way to independently adjust the pitch and speed of recorded sound. Now, if you take a sound and slow it down,
it will have a lower pitch.
But notice if I play a middle C on Groc, and then a fifth below, we are lowering the pitch of the sample without slowing it down. And that allows us to do this. So how do we do that? The trick is to break the sound down into small pieces, slow down the individual pieces, and then stitch them back together so that the playback speed is unchanged. In a granular synthesizer, the pieces are referred to as grains. But the idea of taking small pieces, manipulating them, and then stitching them back together is really common across all of digital signal processing. On Groc, we indicate the grains with the orange rectangles, where the width represents the size. When we're not playing a note, it indicates where the first grain will be drawn. As I play a middle C, notice we'll have 2 or 3 orange boxes moving to the right as we sweep through the sound. Now, if you want to tune a sound down by an octave, you take the grains of sound, slow each one down by a factor of 2, and combine them together to create the output. Because each grain will be played half as fast, it will be twice as long. So one typically shapes the grain with the windowing function and allows multiple grains to overlap at each moment of the playback. Notice when I play an octave below middle C, the grains are further apart than when I play middle C, which are further still than when I play an octave above. The reason is that while we're always taking the same sized piece of the input sound, when we lower it, we have to stretch the pieces out and they get longer, so we need to take them less often to create the smooth output. When we pitch the sound up, the pieces get shorter, and we need more of them to create the smooth output. On Groc, when you have the overlap knob in the middle, you get roughly 2 or 3 grains at any given moment of playback. So far, we have preserved the sample's playback speed because the position in the sample where we start a grain, sometimes called the playhead, is advanced in real time at the normal rate. Now we can adjust the playback speed simply by moving the playhead through the sound more or less quickly. We can even move backwards, of course. What I've described is one of the simplest approaches to independently changing the pitch and speed of a sample. And while there are more sophisticated algorithms, the idea of a granular synthesizer is to provide hands-on control over key parameters like grain size, the amount of overlap, or the window shaping function. Groc provides all of the parameters expected of a granular synth and then some in the middle row on the right-hand side, labeled grains. When the LED in the toggle switch above the word grains is off, the encoders control the playback speed, the grain size, the amount of overlap between grains, and the shaping function. If we leave the speed set to 1, set the size around 200 milliseconds, and set the overlap and shape roughly in the middle, Groc produces smooth playback of the sample and adjusts the pitch chromatically up and down the keyboard while preserving the playback speed. As you play different keys and adjust the playback speed, the grain size can have a big influence over the final sound. With larger grains, we might hear more blurring or repetition of transient parts in the sound. And as the grains get smaller, The pitch of the output can be influenced by the interval between the grains. Groc's size encoder explores a range between 3 milliseconds and 3 seconds. When set below the midpoint, it will time reverse the grains. This is independent of the speed, so we can move backwards with the playhead with time reversed grains and essentially just have normal reversed sound. We can move backwards with grains that are not time reversed. And obviously this effect is more dramatic the larger the grains. Or we can move forward with time reversed grains. This changes dramatically as we move to a different sound. Groc produces smooth playback when the overlap knob is in the middle. On the left side of the range, there will be more space between the grains, creating rhythmic patterns with gaps. And moving the knob to the right will cause more grains to overlap at once. We can influence the timbre a lot with the grain shape parameter also, getting a bell curve on the left and a rectangular window on the right. The difference might be subtle for some sounds and with high overlap, but is very audible when creating rhythmic patterns by reducing the grain overlap. Now each of these 4 parameters has a secondary function accessed by depressing the encoder. For the shape encoder, the secondary function will bias the grain shape toward the front or back edge. The secondary function for the speed, size, and overlap parameters all introduce different types of random variation called smear, variability, and jitter. These random variations move away from what is called synchronous granular synthesis and help prevent the output from taking on the pitch of the grain interval, or the gap between grains. I'm using about an 80 millisecond grain, and I have significant overlap between the grains with no randomization at all. Listen as I step from middle C downward. The sample sounds nice. That's what it would normally sound like. But now I'm going to step down the white keys. It's not fantastic. So a way to improve that is simply by introducing some variation. So now let's introduce a little smear. Here's the B. And as I introduce smear, if we also increase the grain size a little bit, it becomes even more natural. Similarly, if we use the jitter, and it is no longer exact, the interval between the grains, here's our B, and I've introduced just a bit of jitter. And again with a little bit bigger grains. If we turn up the smear just a little, introducing some size variability, can be a bit more subtle in this case. And we can get some nice rhythmic sounds by decreasing the overlap and putting that bias towards the front edge of the grain. And maybe we want that to be more regular, and I'll turn down the jitter. Maybe we even want to sync that to the tempo. And notice we get a different tempo with a different note, but I can choose to regulate the grain size at the output. And now we'll get the same grain size no matter the note we play, and therefore we'll also get onto the same rhythmic pattern. So that may be subtle, but being able to control whether we're controlling the size of the grain at the input sound or the output sound can have a big influence, especially in this rhythmic case. And now introducing some size variability can be a very nice effect. Now Groc still has 4 more primary grains parameters. When we touch the toggle switch, we get tuning, placement, filter, and fidelity. Again, each of these has a secondary function accessed by depressing the toggle. One of our favorites is scatter, the secondary function of placement. So here we have a middle C, and if I move placement to the left, to the right ear, and as I depress the encoder, we get scatter, which will now randomly position the grains between the left and the right ears. This can be combined with good effect with the filter, which is a bandpass filter per grain. In this case, the secondary function is the center frequency of this bandpass filter. But both the bandwidth and the center frequency can be randomized via the touchscreen. When you see a blue icon on Groc's touchscreen, simply touch it. It will turn orange. So does the encoder to the upper left of the display. Now, as I turn this, I'll be introducing random variation to the center frequency of the bandpass filter. Since we've already introduced random variation to the placement in the stereo field, each grain is now bandpass filtered and placed somewhere to my left, right, or center. Finally, we can reduce the fidelity of the sample. First, I'll turn the filter effect down. And again, a secondary parameter that allows us to introduce randomization. So now we have the fidelity effect coming and going with the different grains. Okay, so the sun is setting on my video and on the day. Thanks for your attention. That was a little dive into Groc's grain parameters, synchronous and asynchronous granular synthesis, and how it relates to Gabor's original ideas about independent manipulation of speed and pitch in a sound. Bye-bye.